My cup runneth over. My next guest wants to turn you all into atheists to deprogram the faithful amongst us. So the professor gets a koala stamp even before he starts the chat. I welcome into the studio Dr. Peter Boghossian, who's here for a series of talks called How Do You Know? The good professor has been brought here by my old friends in the Australian Rationalist Association. More recently, he's been researching ways to deprogram jihadists, taking lessons, would you believe, from the tobacco industry. Peter's latest book is called A Manual for Creating Atheists, and he teaches critical thinking, science and pseudoscience, atheism and new atheism, and numerous other related disciplines at Portland State University. G'day, Peter. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
A Manual for Creating Atheists.
You look perplexed.
I look delighted.
Pleasantly perplexed. Yeah, it was a book about how to give people the tools to talk to people of faith, how to have more productive conversations, and how to help them reflect on their beliefs.
And you make a distinction between faith and religion.
That's right. That's right. Faith is under-evidenced belief or unevidenced belief. And with religion comes songs and community and bingo and friendships and relationships.
You build on Dawkins, Hitchens and Harris, don't you?
That's correct. And Dennett, that's correct. And so they identified the problem and they made it possible for us to have a conversation. And the question is, what do we do now? How do we help people to free themselves of delusions, faith-based delusions? So it's not enough that we identify the problem. We have to act on the problem in some constructive way.
Or as you say in the book, to rationalize irrational thinking and to decrease false beliefs and increase true ones.
That's exactly the goal. Everybody has that same commonality. I talked about that gave a talk, Jesus, the Easter Bunny, and Other Delusions, Just Say No. It's on YouTube. And the idea is that we all want to have more true beliefs and fewer false beliefs. And
as long as you don't attack the tooth fairy, for which I think there is solid and substantial evidence, because if you lose a tooth, you get some money in the jar.
Well,
solid
scientific then the question, how do you know that, right? That's the causal relationship between the jar and the...
A jar and the jaw.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues is that people who formulate their beliefs on the basis of faith, those beliefs are less likely to be true and more likely to be not just false, but arbitrary and ultimately harmful and hurtful to people.
One of the things I've discovered over a lifetime of advocating atheism to people of faith is that faith is something that people aspire to, and even when they profess it, they don't necessarily really have it. It's like the rainbow, the pot of God. They want to get there, but they're full of doubt.
And that's the thing. How do we help people have certain values or certain dispositions that lead them toward rationality and away from irrationality? And part of the problem with faith is that it's bundled with a moral edifice. And so how do we help people to make that shift between faith as a virtue and faith as a failed way of knowing? And that's the key shift.
And you also look at other failed ways of knowing, don't you? The paranormal world,
right.
Water divination,
right,
etc.
See, you're familiar with my material. Yeah, so it's not just faith, but faith is or can be a particularly nasty manifestation of under-evidenced or unwarranted beliefs. Superstition falls into that category as well.
Where would you put climate change denialism?
Oh, that's a great question. That's something I've been thinking about for a long time. That's a little more complicated because it's fueled by corporate interests, and it's not...
Fueled being a well-chosen word.
Thank you. The pun was intended. So it's not something that's... It doesn't come in general with... It's not bundled with a moral virtue. If you think that the Earth's warming is not anthropogenic, you don't think that makes you a better person for believing that. And that's the difference between that and faith.
Tell me about your phone app called Atheists.
So the fact is that fewer and fewer people are reading, fewer people are watching television, more people are watching YouTube and podcasts like yours, and using apps. And so I wanted to make a tool and I dedicated an incredible amount of time on this with my team, to give people the tools to help people become more reflective about their faith-based beliefs.
Is it out yet? Can I sort of download it?
No, it's not out yet, but I'll show you the beta. It's in beta now. We're testing it with groups of people. I'll show it to you after the...
Okay, and what would happen when I'm sort of feeling stirrings of faith and spiritual confusion? I can hit the atheist button.
No. If you ever feel that, you call me immediately. I'll help you through that.
Right. Okay. You've got a 12-stage program.
I'll give you my direct line. I'm the perfect person with whom you should speak. No, so it's an app, and it runs people through. There are thousands and thousands of fields. Anything that somebody can say to you, anything and it goes from less complicated to more complicated. The more complicated arguments, like cosmological arguments for the existence of God, the Kalam cosmological arguments, ontological arguments, and then there's even a section called curveballs, weird, crazy things people can say to you about time travel, Jesus, Muhammad being the same person, what have you. So you open the app, and then it just guides you through questions. So if the believer says this, you say this. And if you get the wrong answer, it tells you why it's wrong. So it teaches you, every question is designed as an intervention to intervene in people's cognitions, to change them, to help them value certain things like belief revision.
I often sit here bemoaning a world where analogs and algorithms have taken over the planet, and here I am tentatively endorsing another algorithm. Got to move with the times, don't I? Yeah. Clay tablets are out of fashion.
Yeah, I think if the algorithm that you're advocating is going to help people, then the fact that it's an algorithm is unimportant.
Long word algorithm. Here's another one. Epistemology. Yeah. You argue that people should put their metaphysics before their epistemology. Tell Gladys what epistemology is.
Epistemology is basically the study of knowledge. So it's how we know what they know. And I argue that they should put their epistemology first. And what that means is basically, let's clean up the way we know things and make sure that we proportion our belief to the evidence. Can you be wrong? Yeah, sure, you can always be wrong. But you can do the best job that you can do to be honest with yourself and really ask yourself sincerely, can I be said to know this, or do I want to believe it? And there's a difference between know and believe.
You would argue, for example, that the belief in God is a conclusion arrived at as a result of faulty epistemology.
That's right, and that's how you create atheists. I don't think a person who's sincere with themselves and takes an independent, as much as possible, dispassionate look at the evidence can come to certain beliefs, which are metaphysics, like the furniture of the universe, what there is. I don't think that they can come to the belief or have any confidence in the belief that there was a supernatural creator.
Are you as harsh on people of faith as Richard Dawkins? Or do you have some compassion for them?
It's funny. We just spoke about that Friday night. We had a fireside chat, and he tried. The Dawkins Foundation is sponsoring the app. They've been fantastic. And he went through the app, and he laughed, and he said, and I got most of these wrong. So it's funny. He got the answers incorrect because he chose the more strident answers, and the app gears people.
That's Richard for you.
Yeah, that is right. And the app gears you to have a more gentle but blunt approach. Very respectful, but blunt and gentle.
That's a bit more Christopher Hitchensonian, isn't it?
Yeah. So
Christopher can be pretty tough.
Yeah.
But he's slightly more calibrated, I think, than Dawkins.
Dawkins is incredibly effective at the macro level interventions, and the big, broad interventions when he talks to people on television, and his message really relates to people, and he's helped. I mean, the God delusion has helped. I don't even know how many people.
The why behind all this is really to do with critical thinking. Hardly a new concept. Dates back to the 4th century BC, before JC was a sparkle in his mother's eyes, when Socratic ideas were emerging.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's right. The way to help people be more reflective is not to tell them to be reflective or to make demands on them, but to gently ask them certain questions in which they can reflect upon their beliefs. And I really do think that there are certain conclusions that one will come to. I think we've been preoccupied with conclusions: gun control, abortion, gay marriage. I was just reading the paper about your prime minister and housing. And I think we haven't looked at and been honest with ourselves about not only the nature of our problems, but how we know what we think we know.
Incidentally, we'll be giving the Atheists app to our Prime Minister and, in fact, the entire front bench of the current government. I've always found in trying to talk to people of faith, and I call myself a faithist,
right,
because I have faith in the scientific process, which is something I don't understand, but I trust it.
Right.
So, even an atheist takes leaps of faith in a paradoxical sense.
I don't think that's true. I know how you use the word because I listened to your interview with Simon Crickley. And one of the things that you said that I thought was really interesting is you said you have scientists on the program and you talk to them and you have faith in what they're saying, that you pretend to know what they're saying. And I thought that was such an interesting way to frame it, because I think that that's what many religious people do, is that they're pretending to know things they don't know. I
mention it because I've done a dozen television programs with Paul Davies and a couple of books called The Big Questions. And at the end of it, I was still as confused by the counterintuitive nature, say, of quantum mechanics as I was at the beginning. But I don't want to push that too far.
But you wouldn't have, that's an important point, because you wouldn't have faith in that. I think that's use of the word, and the word faith has a wide semantic range. But I think when religious people say that they have faith in something, it's a different sort of usage for the word. So when a religious person says, I have faith that Jesus walked on water, or I have faith that Jesus will heal me, they're claiming to know something.
Okay, I want to come back to the question of religious doubt. Religious people always assume that we atheists are going to flail about in our deathbeds and say, look, I'm sorry, let me in. I gave an annual lecture at Queensland University many years ago, an annual lecture to a room full of people of religious beliefs across all sorts of, there were rabbis, there were Catholic priests, there were nuns, there were pretty much the whole kit and caboodle. And I reversed that and I said, I suspect that many of you will die badly, that despite the faith, the conviction that you profess, that you try and market to others, that you really lack the faith you state. Later, a few doctors came up to me, a couple of anaesthetists, a few nurses who happened to be there, and confirmed that this was true. Now, I don't take any particular pleasure in that, but it comes back to the point that for many people, faith is an aspiration, not an achievement.
Yeah, and what's also interesting is I think a lot of people try to talk themselves into faith, like Mother Teresa. There's some interesting stuff. And Hitch wrote a lot of stuff about Mother Teresa. You're laughing. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I thought Hitchens' book on Mother Teresa was the first time I really realised how cheeky he was.
Right. Oh, The Missionary Position.
Yeah.
A wonderful book. And I think when people are honest with themselves, I love that, by the way, what you did. I think when that's a call to self-honesty. So you don't have to wait. You're never too old to abandon superstition. You're never too old to abandon faith and proportion your belief to the evidence.
Coming back to your argument about faith versus religion, this is a quote of yours. By undermining faith, one is able to undermine almost all religions simultaneously, and it may be much easier to help someone abandon their faith than it is to separate them from their religion.
That's right. You have done your homework. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Faith is the support beam that holds the whole thing up. And virtually all religions have supernatural claims, and those supernatural claims are supported by faith. Faith is ultimately, when you start asking people questions and have a sincere conversation with somebody, the root of the whole thing is faith.
Coming back to the Socratic techniques that you want to employ rather than energetic proselytizing, coming back to that, it always seems to me that one of the things we can use is the infinite curiosity that human beings have. and that it's not, curiosity doesn't end with the embrace of a faith. It might be severely damaged by it, by the dogmas. Tainted by it. But I've always found that you can, in fact, talk to even a very dogmatic member of religious belief, and you can get them going by appealing to their curiosity about the very big, the very little, the big questions of science.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I personally enjoy those conversations. And one of the things I found is that virtually every person of faith, if not even every person of faith, would love to have that discussion with you. And so one of the things that I try to do with the Socratic techniques is I try to instill doubt in people. I try to help them doubt certain for example, if somebody claims that the universe was created by a god or gods, then I would say something like, and I would ask, so that's the hypothesis in the Socratic method, then you would then target that by a counterexample to undermine it. And so I would ask a question, usually a how do you know question. Well, how do you know the universe wasn't always here? Okay, is it possible that it was always here? And if they say yes, then the degree to which it's possible that it was always here undermines their belief that there had to have been a supernatural creator. So it's a way to instill doubt in a belief.
I found as a child the one question that would nonplus the kids at school, and we used to argue about this, who insisted that there had to be a beginning and God was the beginning. Right. You would then say, well, who began God?
Right.
That's another technique of subversion, if you like.
Yeah, to instill doubt. More people who have a little training in this, more what Jerry Quinn calls sophisticated believers. One of the things you'll find is that people have built-in answers from their church groups and from their synagogues and mosques about how to answer questions that deal with their beliefs. But what they almost never have are questions for dealing with how they know that their beliefs are true. And that's a difference between questioning their epistemology and their conclusions.
Let's move on to your recent work in prisons, techniques you've nicked, as I said in the intro, from the tobacco industry, once again involving doubt.
Yeah, so what I did in prisons is I drew from the research literature on how to change people's behavior, how to change their cognitions. And I use the Socratic method as a base, but motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, things that we know works, evidence-based techniques in the literature. And then I found questions that I found interesting that I think related to the people in my study. What is it to be a man? What's worth dying for? What are the obligations of friendship? And then I conducted interventions using those questions to help them be more reflective about their moral lives.
Many prisoners, in fact, find God rather than atheism inside. One of my guests a few years ago was Helen Prégine, the Roman Catholic nun who wrote Dead Man Walking, became a spiritual advisor to a death row killer. He finally confessed to rape and murder after spending months with the good sister. I sometimes think that we can find allies amongst the religious. We shouldn't condemn them all to outer darkness. Many of them would share our political ideas and attitudes.
I have religious friends. I have much in common with my religious friends. I think one thing that's important, something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is I don't think that it matters so much how someone thinks the universe came into being, but if people are kind to one another. And the problem is...
I entirely agree.
Yeah.
I often say at the end of correspondence to an angry Christian, if indeed that's the faith that I've offended, let's not let a little thing like God come between us.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think part of the problem is that people have dug themselves into cognitive sinkholes because they have a certain view about the origin of the universe that leads them down this rabbit hole of thinking that, God knows where you should put your genitalia or what have you. And it's, in one sense, it can kill somebody's kindness, and it can cause people to treat other people very harshly or inhumanely.
You come from a society, from a nation where religion isn't so much the problem as religiosity, when it is immensely toxic in the political system, where it leads to the most appalling outcomes. And in fact, sitting on this side of the Pacific, we look across at you at a nation that seems to be almost on the verge of ungovernable. Is there any evidence that the tide is turning?
Yeah, well, first of all, I apologize for our political
I hold
leaders.
you personally responsible.
Yeah, I certainly do.
Don't try to wriggle out of that.
You know, the vast majority of Republicans, for example, not only do they deny anthropogenic global warming, they deny the facts of evolution, right? So if you can't get people to accept certain facts that are rudimentary and around you, then so that just goes to show you how that's ideologically motivated. So why is it that most Republicans deny anthropogenic global warming, but most Democrats do not? It's certainly not based upon the science. So there's an ideology that's operating in place. And I think, again, it's an opportunity to have been more honest about that. But yeah, the discourse is increasingly polarized, and that's unfortunate. But your original...
Well, I'm saying with you, with Christopher, with Dawkins, et al., with the new atheism, one of the things you teach, are there significant signs of gains?
Oh, yeah, there are. The nuns, people. So it's really interesting. Mark Zuckerman has some interesting research on that. He's a friend of mine at Pitzer University, runs a secular studies program. What's interesting is we're seeing what people call the rise of the nuns. And
we've had many of them on the program.
Right. Well, that's good for you. You're helping to normalize the fact that we don't eat babies and don't do horrible things. And when people live lives of reason, it has no relationship. Not only does it not have a relationship to immorality, but it could have a positive correlation to moral action. But I think one of the things that we find in free societies is people are becoming less religious and more tolerant. But the other side of that statistic that you don't really hear very much about is that people who are in closed societies, you see increased religiosity, and it's not the exact word, but increased fundamentalism.
Well, beloved listeners, this lesson in epistemology came to you courtesy of Professor Peter Boghossian, who's a professor of philosophy at Portland. He's a member of the Global Secular Council and a speaker for the Centre of Inquiry and the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. And if you want to become a street epistemologist, dear listener, look out for the professor's book, A Manual for Creating Atheist Details, at the LNL website. And Peter has a whole array of speaking dates all over the place in the next month. The most immediate this week. Tomorrow night in Kyneton in Victoria at the Albion Pub. On Friday in Melbourne at the State Library of Victoria, a splendid institution, and the remaining dates will be found on the LNL website. Good on you, Pete. Koala stab with gumleaf cluster. Tomorrow, a Ukraine update, and we'll be shining a light on the life and work of Rothko, the abstract painter, he of the massive rectangles of pulsing primary colours, and a mate of Jackson Pollock of Blue Pole's infamy. But for now, time for the news. Talk to you soon.